Hi, I'm Dr. Mathias Norvig, expert on pre-Christian Scandinavian mythology and religion at the University of Colorado Boulder, and this is the Nordic Mythology channel. I am standing here at beautiful Vardruna in Norway, where we have Midgårdsblot, the heavy metal festival, happening right up here next to us. And I am standing with Einar Selvik of Wardruna. Wardruna's music is based off of the Nordic past, the Viking age, Nordic mythology, and the Nordic Iron Age as well. And that's what we're going to talk about. Einar, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
And welcome to the channel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
So, first question I want to ask you is, how did you come up with this? Like, what was your inspiration to make Wardruna music?
I guess it comes from different things. I think even from childhood, there's been an interest, and I've been exposed to history a lot as a child. I didn't reflect much upon it back then, but you know, when hearing all of these stories about what had happened here like thousands of years ago, and yeah, all of these things, I guess it created some images that stuck. When I sort of found my own interest for it in my early teens, I could see, or I see in hindsight, that those things, those stories that I grew up with, and it gave me a sense of history and time and place in history.
Yeah.
In a way, it connected me to the landscape, and so I guess there it started, and of course my interest, I guess in my early teens, my interest was first and foremost on the esoteric tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky enough to be pointed in a, how to say, healthy direction in terms of go study the sources,
Mm-hmm.
not so much New Age books on Old Norse esoteric tradition. Not that everything about the new lore is wrong, but I think it's a good thing to go and find out how we know what we think we know about these things. And so I guess that saved me a lot of time.
Yeah.
And confusion. And I've been doing music since I was a child. I was obsessed by playing drums as a small child, and yeah, create music. I never liked playing other people's music, so that drove me to learn other instruments and stuff like that, so I could make music. And played lots of different music, and mostly metal throughout my teens, but I've always, or for a long time, had this vision of doing something that is more connected to my passion and interest for history, and for my roots, and for these traditions that I feel sort of lost their voice in a way, so and became forgotten. And at some point, all the other music became a mechanical thing for me, and when I don't have energy or emotion into something, I'm not very good at it as well. So I decided to basically start over again, and yeah, explore these themes and subjects and traditions interpreted musically on their own premises, rather than just borrowing lyrical content or an instrument here or there, or imagery, or I wanted to make something, give it a voice where you used relevant instrumentation and sounds and language, those things.
And that's something that I find really interesting about the type of music that you guys make. I don't think this type of music has a genre name yet.
I hope not. It's music.
Yeah, it's music. That's something I find really interesting. How it's very obvious that it's a very creative process, and that you experiment a lot with different things, and you dig deep into both written sources from the medieval period and to more recent folklore and folk customs from Norway in particular.
Absolutely, it's well, it's important to not climb into trees that don't have roots. So building on something solid before venturing into the creative process is something I find important, whether or not it's about the subjects or the musical aspects of it. And yeah, well, I think that one thing is to study the oldest sources we have, but also you have to remember that the acceptance of Christianity here, or the rise of Christianity here, was not a grassroots movement. It came from above, in a sense. So people just kept on doing their stuff, and when you go into these folkloristic sources, you see that people were sacrificing to trees and stones up until early 1900s in Norway and other places in Scandinavia. So there are a lot of things, a lot of interesting things to find in recent sources as well. I think, but also in terms of musicology, it's difficult to say exactly how music would have sounded like in the Viking Age or Bronze Age or whatnot. But on the other hand, there is a lot of traces here and there that you find both in the oldest song traditions in Scandinavia and Iceland, for instance, and other places also of relevance. But also you see in the limitations you find in certain instruments that some of them we even have a living tradition of using here in Norway. They've been, we know at least they have a 5,000-year tradition. And we also know that the tonality of it is the same, and it's quite limited what you can and cannot do on them. So I don't know, puzzling together all of these things. You can clearly see patterns both in terms of the oral tradition of expressing music or art, but also in terms of the instrumentation. I have to say though that for me it has never been the goal to be authentic at any cost. I try to build on solid ground, but for me it's about taking something old, and especially the parts of it that still resonate and still sort of carry that potent value and knowledge that we can make use of, and give it a new voice that resonates today.
Do you think that in a sense then you're creating authenticity? From a scholarly standpoint, one could say, it's very difficult or maybe even impossible to go from like medieval sources to modern or early modern folklore, and that would then from a scholarly standpoint be like inauthentic. But would you say that what you're actually doing now is creating a modern authenticity?
In a way, yes, because the sources will only take you this far, and then I guess my advantage is that I come from it both from an academic perspective, but I also put it into practice. I try out these hypotheses in front of an audience, and when you do, you have to remember that this is performance. And a performance, whether or not it's ritual or just a for entertainment, there are certain rules that are timeless and universal. You do and you feed off what works when in front of an audience. So it's not only about what you do; it's about how you do it, and so tapping into how it's always been done, and being very honest about it as well. I think potentially has made it quite authentic, and give you a feeling of history, even though it has a modern expression to it. It has a modern soundscape to it. At least the full-on Wardruna soundscape is a fully modern one. The tonality and many of the techniques are thousands of years old, and you find it in so many places on this planet, and certain things you do will just automatically give you a feeling of those old roots. I don't know. There are ways of explaining it, but there are also things within it that's difficult to. It's hard to give words to it, because it's feelings.
Yeah,
also.
exactly. It's feelings.
It's art.
So speaking about feelings, what does it mean to you to create this type of music and to offer it to the world?
Well, I've always, for me, Wardruna, that's something I've always done for myself.
Mm-hmm.
It was a thing that's born out of. I don't like to use the word a calling, but it's hard to find any other word for it, because it's something I couldn't not do it, and I don't know. It's just a thing that I just could see it so clearly and hear it so clearly, and it's a thing that I'm chasing constantly today, as much as I did almost 20 years ago. And the fact that, when I did it in the beginning, I didn't think people would like it at all. I thought it would be way too weird, and I didn't really care. I still don't care, actually. Yeah. When I'm in that creative space, I don't care about anything. I create the things that I hear and want to hear. Yeah. So when I started to show the music the first times, my earliest recordings, to my closest friends and family, and people reacted so strongly to it. So that was very surprising, but also a sort of I don't know, a confirmation that this method of being a vessel in a way, because the idea, I started out working with runes, trying to interpret them on their own premises as far as our sparse sources reveal in terms of what they possibly mean or are connected to. And by doing so, I've sort of taken it quite far in terms of using sounds that are connected to it, or state of mind, or time of year, time of day, certain places of record in spaces that have relevance to whatever subject. So in that sense, you can say that it is the themes, or the runes in this case, that was the composer, and I was just the instrument.
And that's another interesting aspect, this notion of added value. Your process is not just to use any kind of instrument. Sometimes you fashion your own instruments and use them in a particular context. Would you care to talk a little bit about that and explain some of those processes?
Yeah. It can be instruments. It can be instruments such as trees or stones or torches ripping in the wind, or it can be anything. It can be it can be using water. Just the fact of performing. Like one of the songs, all the vocal tracks are recorded while I'm standing in the middle of a river. When using the song when interpreting bjarkan, the birch tree. I play on birch trees in the forest, use the bark and the wind in the leaves to sort of enhance the quality, only playing the branches leaning towards the east. All of these, trying to get as much details, as much nerdiness, both in terms of the artistic, but also in terms of all of these small things that we know and possibly know.
Yeah.
So there are many layers. Most of them I won't tell a soul.
Right.
But like these are the most obvious ones. And of course, in terms of the instruments themselves, I'm originally a drummer, but when I decided to go into this process, I started to go into the ethnomusicology of Scandinavia and also our neighboring countries that have similar traditions, and in some cases have things and elements that are better preserved.
Yeah.
And at the time there was very little information and almost nobody working with these things. These days the interest has exploded and there are so many people building these instruments again, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool to see.
But at that point I was basically left to, you either have to build it, I had to build it myself or get somebody to build it for me. And so it was a lot of trial and error, and I made quite a few shitty instruments. But also, I in this hunt for finding the instrument's own voice, I decided at an early point that I didn't want to hear any music ever played on them, like the goat horn or lyre or tagelharpa. I didn't want to hear anything because I wanted to approach it like a child and try and find the instrument's own voice before I sort of it's so easy to color it with intent subconsciously. If I give a tagelharpa to one of my musicians, for instance, that come from the folk music, the traditional stuff, they will play traditional stuff on it.
Yes.
Automatically they go into that, which is not completely wrong, of course, because there are a lot of traces in the oldest folk music that you can quite clearly detect have a much older origin. Certain things, but still, so I try to approach that as well, to find the instrument's own voice. So it's safe to say that it's taken a lot of time, this whole process, but I promised myself at an early point that I didn't want to cheat and take any shortcuts. So it just has to take the time it needs to take. I don't work well when I have to force it through. So it took me 7 years to create the first album, and a lot of it was finding the voice of these instruments and sort of the recipe of how I wanted to tell the story.
Yes.
In a sense.
So, and moving on from there to some of the mythology that you use. So, you, for instance, created the song Völuspá, and I wanted to hear a little bit what inspired you to pick Völuspá as a theme for a song.
Völuspá is so central. Well, I love these circular patterns that you seem to find in almost all of the Nordic myths. You somehow can detect this cycle of death and rebirth, and I don't know. It on a personal level, it makes a lot more sense than the Christian linear thinking when thinking about time and nature, and I think the whole cyclic thinking resonates more to me on a personal level, and of course the vivid imagery of Völuspá, the beautiful poetry, the complexity of the poetry, how the person who created it even seemingly chose words to mimic the content by the sound they have. It's just so impressive. It's not an easy task, and at some point I think I want to do the whole poem. Mm-hmm. That's something I'm working on as well, but it's not a lightweight job. But I don't know what inspired me. I think that there are many. For me, I see that some people who use lyre use very theatrical, melodic ways in terms of the melodies are very strong and not easy to capture, really. I believe, and when we see, for instance, Karelian tradition, which the song tradition and poetic tradition, which is definitely connected and was preserved for so much longer, when you see there that there were certain melodies for common people, and there were certain melodies by the experts. And also you have these experts saying plainly that one of the things that creates memory, both in terms of you remembering what I sing, but also me remembering what I sing, or I'm supposed to be singing, is connected to both rhythm and melody.
Yeah.
And so when finding the voice of these old poems in terms of singing them, you have to tap into that, how the words themselves guide you in terms of rhythm and melody. And we also know from later tradition that verse meter is connected to specific melody and ways of singing, recipes of singing it. You see it in remake tradition. You see it in the oldest kvea or stev tradition in Norway, where like singing some of the forms of gammel stev in Norway, you can easily do at least half of Håvamål perfect. Yeah. Like it fits like this.
Yeah.
And same thing with you have the same verse meters in Iceland in some of the rimmer meters. So I don't know what inspired it. I think in terms of my strategy, I guess, is to just have as broad as possible knowledge of it. So to possibly be able to see some sort of pattern, and it's a lot of trial and error, and also it comes down to feeling.
Yeah.
And maybe other melodies struck a chord back then, but I don't think we changed that much. And like I said before, in terms of melody, we know for a fact by instrument limitation and tunings, we know they had at least 1500 years back.
Yeah.
Even further, that they are similar to ours.
Yeah. Okay, so very last question. It's a simple one, I hope. What is your favorite place to perform in?
That's actually not an easy question. No, but since the very first concert we ever did with Wardruna, that was actually in front of the Viking ships at the Viking ship museum in Bygdøy. So we debuted in front of the Gokstad ship, which was, of course, a huge honor.
Yeah.
And it created a very distinct awareness that the power of performing in a space that complement the music. Then 2 + 2 becomes 6. So using that, space is important. So that's what we hunt for when we choose places to play. Of course, that's difficult, and you can't always play under the open skies with trees surrounding you, or on top of a burial mound or a Viking ship.
No.
But we try to in any case, find an aesthetic that is suitable. I think our music is best enjoyed under the open sky, with some rain,
a little
and
bit
wind.
of wind.
Yeah. Feel it shouldn't be, art shouldn't be too comfortable.
No.
Friction is fruitful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that, having spent a couple of days in Bergen.
Oh yes. Yeah.
You need to love the Norwegian rain. That's
Yeah, you don't live in Bergen because of the weather, in a sense. But at the same time, that's one of the things I enjoy most about Norway, is the fact that we have the seasons are very clear.
Yes.
In a sense.
Yes.
And you get a lot of weather.
Yes. Well, Einar, thank you very much for joining me here on the channel.
My pleasure.
It was great to hear about your process and your inspiration, the things that go into the music that you make. And thank you guys for joining us as well. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you can also find Nordic Mythology channel on Instagram and Facebook.